The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the biochemistry lab at Westridge University. Most students had already packed up and left for the day, but Aiden Wright was still hunched over his workstation, carefully measuring tiny amounts of plant extract into test tubes. At 22 years old, with bright eyes that reflected his constant curiosity, Aiden had already earned a reputation among professors as one of the department's most promising talents. Just a few more tests, he mumbled to himself, jotting down notes in his worn research journal. The lab was peaceful at this hour, just the gentle hum of equipment and the occasional bubble from the experimental mixture he was developing. This quiet focus was exactly why Aiden preferred working late, long after his classmates had left for dinner or study groups. Aiden didn't come from money like many of his classmates. He'd grown up in Pine Ridge, a neighborhood where the nearest grocery store was a 40-minute bus ride away. His mom had worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and sometimes that meant dinners of whatever was available at the corner store. Those memories shaped his research focus now, creating affordable, nutritious food alternatives that could grow almost anywhere, even in places without good soil or much water. He carefully placed his latest sample, a small protein bar made from a blend of modified plant proteins, into a sealed container and labeled it with today's date. This batch wasn't ready for testing yet. The compounds needed more analysis before they could be cleared as safe for consumption. Still, the preliminary results were promising. Aiden glanced at the clock on the wall and realized he'd worked through dinner again. His stomach growled in protest. All right, he said to himself with a small laugh. I hear you. He began cleaning his workspace, organizing his notes for tomorrow's continuation. The sudden sound of voices in the hallway made him look up. Strange. Nobody usually came to this part of the science building this late. The voices grew louder, and Aiden could make out Professor Chen, his department head, speaking in that formal tone she reserved for important visitors. Our biochemistry department has been ranked in the top 20 nationally for 3 years running, she was saying, and just through these doors is our advanced research laboratory, where some of our most promising students conduct their independent projects. The laboratory doors swung open, and Aiden straightened up quickly as a group of people in business attire filed into the room. Professor Chen led the way, followed by Dean Williams and several strangers in expensive-looking suits. Aiden immediately recognized one face among them, Richard Porter, the tech billionaire whose face regularly appeared in business magazines and news segments about innovation. Aiden's heart raced. He'd read about Porter's company planning to build a research facility near campus, but he had no idea the billionaire himself would be visiting. Porter had made his fortune in tech, but was now focusing his considerable resources on global problems, sustainable energy, water purification, and food security. His investment fund had backed some of the most groundbreaking scientific startups of the past decade. As you can see, even at this hour our students are hard at work, Professor Chen said proudly, gesturing toward Aiden. Aiden smiled nervously as all eyes turned to him. He suddenly wished he'd worn something nicer than his faded university sweatshirt with the small coffee stain on the sleeve. And what are you working on, young man? Dean Williams asked, clearly trying to showcase student research to their important visitor. I'm developing sustainable protein sources from regional plant compounds. Sir? Aiden replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The goal is to create nutritionally complete food alternatives that can be grown in areas with limited resources. To Aiden's surprise, Porter broke away from the tour group and walked directly toward his workstation. Unlike the others in formal business attire, the billionaire wore dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Despite his casual appearance, there was an intensity to him that commanded attention. Tell me more, Porter said, examining Aiden's notes with genuine interest. He didn't touch anything, but his eyes scanned the workstation with the practiced gaze of someone who understood research methodology. Aiden took a deep breath. This was his chance, a moment he couldn't have imagined when he dragged himself to the lab, after only 4 hours of sleep. The biggest challenge in food-insecure regions isn't just growing enough calories, Aiden explained, warming to his subject. It's providing complete nutrition that can be produced locally, without expensive infrastructure or technologies that break down. My research focuses on identifying and enhancing plant proteins that can be grown in difficult conditions. Porter nodded thoughtfully. "And these are your test samples?" he asked, pointing to the sealed containers. "Yes, sir. This batch incorporates a newly identified compound from desert-adapted legumes. Early tests show promising nutritional profiles, but we're still assessing potential allergenic properties and long-term stability." As they talked, a staff member wheeled in a cart with refreshments for the visitors, coffee, water, and an assortment of snacks arranged on platters. The tour group gradually moved toward the break area, but Porter seemed reluctant to end his conversation with Aiden. "You know," Porter said, leaning slightly closer, "I grew up in a rural community where most families struggled during the winter months when fresh food was scarce and expensive. That's why your research resonates with me." Aiden's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected such a personal connection from a billionaire. "That's exactly why I'm doing this," he replied, his nervousness fading. "Food shouldn't be a luxury." Porter smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "Keep going with this work. It matters." He handed Aiden a business card with his personal email address scrawled on the back. "Send me your research proposal when you have time. I'd like to read the full scope." Stunned, Aiden accepted the card with slightly trembling hands. "Thank you, sir. I will." The billionaire nodded and finally joined the rest of his group for refreshments. Aiden remained at his station, trying to process what had just happened. He slipped the business card carefully into his wallet, determined to polish his proposal that very night. Across the lab, Dean Williams was animatedly describing the university's 5-year expansion plan, while Professor Chen nodded along. Porter listened politely, occasionally asking questions, but Aiden noticed the billionaire's eyes kept drifting back toward the student research stations with genuine interest. The refreshment table had been set up near the lab's break area, with platters of finger foods arranged neatly beside pitchers of water and a coffee service. As the conversation continued, Porter absently reached toward a plate that had been placed at the end of the table. Aiden's gaze focused on Porter's hand, and his blood suddenly ran cold. The plate contained what looked like ordinary energy bars, but they weren't. They were Aiden's experimental protein samples that he'd left on his secondary workstation, which the catering staff must have mistaken for regular snacks. Horror washed over him as Porter picked up one of the experimental bars, examining it casually as he continued listening to the dean. The billionaire began to unwrap it, bringing it toward his mouth. Without thinking, Aiden shouted across the lab, "Don't eat that!" His voice echoed in the suddenly silent room. Everyone froze. The dean's sentence hung unfinished in the air. Professor Chen's smile vanished, and Richard Porter, one of the most powerful men in the business world, stood perfectly still with Aiden's untested experimental protein bar just inches from his lips, his eyes wide with surprise as they locked with Aiden's across the laboratory. In that suspended moment, Aiden realized his academic career, his future, and possibly his freedom might now depend on what happened next. He had just screamed at a billionaire who could make or break the university's future with a single decision. But he also knew that the untested compounds in that bar could potentially cause a severe allergic reaction. Time seemed to stretch as Aiden took a deep breath and prepared to explain himself, hoping the billionaire would understand why a young black student had just yelled at him in front of everyone. The room seemed frozen in time. Richard Porter slowly lowered the experimental protein bar, his eyebrows raised in question rather than anger. Everyone else, Professor Chen, Dean Williams, the university president, and Porter's entire business team, stared at Aiden in stunned silence. The young student's heart hammered in his chest as he quickly made his way across the lab, weaving between workstations. "I'm very sorry for shouting, sir," Aiden said, trying to keep his voice steady, "but that's not a regular snack. It's part of my research project, an experimental protein compound that hasn't been cleared for human consumption." Porter looked down at the bar in his hand, then back at Aiden. "This is yours?" he asked, his voice calm and curious rather than upset. "Yes, sir. They must have been mixed up with the catering items," Aiden explained, gesturing to his secondary workstation nearby. "Those samples contain modified plant proteins that we're still testing. Some early indicators suggest potential allergic reactions in certain subjects." Dean Williams stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Porter, I can't apologize enough for this mix-up." "I assure you," Porter raised a hand, cutting off the dean's apology. "No harm done," he said. carefully rewrapping the bar and handing it to Aiden. Actually, I'm impressed by this young man's quick thinking. That's exactly the kind of attention to detail we need in scientific research. The tension in the room eased slightly, but Aiden could feel Professor Chen's worried gaze on him. He knew he'd broken protocol by shouting across the lab instead of handling the situation more discreetly. But there hadn't been time for niceties. Perhaps you could tell me more about these protein bars, Porter suggested, genuinely interested. What makes them different from commercial products? Aiden took a deep breath, grateful for the opening. The base compounds come from drought-resistant legumes that can grow in harsh conditions, he began, his nervousness giving way to passion for his work. Most commercial protein supplements require intensive farming of soy or whey processing from dairy, both resource-heavy processes. My research focuses on creating complete nutrition from plants that can thrive where other crops fail. Porter nodded thoughtfully. And what stage of development are you in? Third-generation prototyping, Aiden replied. The first two versions had complete amino acid profiles but tasted terrible, he added with a small smile. This version has improved flavor and stability, but we need more testing for potential allergens and digestibility. The university president stepped forward, eager to redirect the conversation. Mr. Porter, perhaps we should continue to the next part of our tour? The engineering department has prepared a special demonstration. In a moment, Porter said, his tone polite but firm. He turned back to Aiden. What inspired this research direction for you? The simple question caught Aiden off guard. Most visitors asked about methodologies or expected outcomes, not personal motivation. He hesitated, aware that everyone was watching him closely. I grew up in a neighborhood where the nearest grocery store was almost an hour away by bus, Aiden said honestly. When my mom couldn't make that trip after long work shifts, we ate whatever was available at corner stores. I saw firsthand how lack of access affects health. He paused. Everyone deserves good food, not just people who live in the right zip codes. Something shifted in Porter's expression. A flash of recognition, perhaps. The billionaire glanced at his expensive watch, then made an unexpected decision. Dean Williams, would you mind if I skip the engineering demonstration? I'd like to hear more about this research, Porter said, gesturing toward Aiden's workstation. The dean blinked in surprise but quickly recovered. Of course, Mr. Porter. Whatever you prefer. Excellent, Porter replied, then turned to his business team. Jackson, please take notes on our discussion. The rest of you can continue with the tour if you'd like. A tall man in a gray suit nodded and remained behind while the university officials reluctantly led the rest of the group from the lab. Professor Chen lingered at the door, giving Aiden a meaningful look that said, "Don't mess this up." Then she too departed, leaving Aiden alone with Porter and his assistant. Now, Porter said, rolling up his sleeves, show me what you're working on. The real version, not the polished presentation. For a moment, Aiden hesitated. His workstation was messy, his notes sometimes scrawled in hurried handwriting when ideas came quickly. But Porter's interest seemed genuine, so Aiden led the way to his research area. It's not very organized, Aiden apologized, quickly moving some books to clear space. The best labs rarely are, Porter replied with a small smile. My first company started in a garage so cluttered we could barely walk through it. Encouraged, Aiden began explaining his research process, starting with his initial hypotheses and showing Porter the progression of his experiments. The billionaire asked thoughtful questions that revealed his own scientific background. Questions about protein denaturation temperatures, enzymatic reactions, and bioavailability factors. The key breakthrough came when we identified this specific strain, Aiden explained, pointing to microscope images in his research journal. It has an unusual amino acid pattern that remains stable even in high heat processing. Porter studied the images with interest. Have you tested shelf life in variable humidity? Limited tests so far, but early results show stability for up to 14 months in humidity ranging from 20 to 80%, Aiden replied. Surprised by the specific question? That's significant, Porter noted. One of the biggest challenges in developing regions is storage without climate control. As their conversation deepened, Aiden found himself forgetting he was speaking with one of the world's wealthiest individuals. Instead, it felt like talking with a fellow researcher who understood both the scientific challenges and the real-world applications. What's your end goal with this? Porter asked, leaning against the lab bench. Patent and license to food manufacturers? Start your own production? Aiden shook his head. Neither, actually. I want to create an open-source formula that communities can adapt to local conditions. Food security shouldn't be held behind patent walls or profit margins. Porter's assistant looked up from his note-taking, eyebrows raised. But Porter himself nodded slowly, studying Aiden with new interest. That's an unusual perspective for someone doing cutting-edge research, Porter observed. Most people in your position would be looking at how to monetize their work. I'm not against sustainable business models, Aiden clarified. But this specific project, it needs to reach people who can't afford premium prices. That's always been the point for me. Porter was quiet for a moment, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the lab bench. Then he pulled out his phone and quickly typed something. I'm canceling my next meeting, he explained, putting the phone away. I'd like to hear more about your implementation strategy. How would communities actually adopt and produce this if it proves viable? For the next 40 minutes, their conversation expanded beyond the biochemistry to practical applications. Aiden described his vision for regional adaptation centers, where local communities could customize the base formula to work with indigenous plants. Porter occasionally challenged his assumptions with practical questions about infrastructure needs and technology transfer challenges, pushing Aiden to think through potential obstacles. You've clearly thought beyond the lab, Porter said finally, checking his watch again. That's rare and valuable. Most researchers never consider the last mile problem, how their innovations actually reach the people who need them most. Aiden felt a mix of pride and humility at the praise. I still have a long way to go before this is viable, he admitted. True, Porter agreed, but you're asking the right questions. He pulled out his business card again, the same one he'd given Aiden earlier, but this time he wrote something else on the back. Email me your full research proposal by the end of the week. Include your vision for implementation and what resources you'd need to accelerate development. Aiden accepted the card, noticing a direct phone number added beneath the email address. Thank you, sir. I will. Porter extended his hand, and as they shook, he said something that would echo in Aiden's mind for days afterward. Sometimes the people who understand a problem from the inside are the ones who find solutions others miss. Your background isn't a limitation, it's your advantage. As Porter and his assistant left the lab, Aiden stood beside his workstation, the business card in his hand feeling simultaneously like a lifeline and a responsibility. The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time it felt possible. The next morning, Aiden woke up earlier than usual, his mind still buzzing from yesterday's unexpected encounter. Sunlight filtered through his apartment blinds as he sat at his small desk, surrounded by textbooks and his old laptop. The business card Richard Porter had given him sat propped against his coffee mug, the handwritten phone number seeming almost unreal in the morning light. He sipped his coffee and stared at the blank document on his screen. Porter wanted his complete research proposal by the end of the week, just 3 days away. Aiden had a basic version already prepared for his academic advisors, but this needed to be different. More comprehensive, more practical, more ambitious. His phone buzzed with a text from his roommate, Leo, who was already at his morning hospital shift. Heard a rumor Porter visited the science building yesterday. Any truth to that? Aiden smiled as he typed back. Yeah, almost ate one of my experimental protein bars. Long story. 3 dots appeared then. What? Tell me everything when I get home. Aiden set his phone aside and focused on his proposal. For the next few hours he worked steadily, organizing his research data, refining his methodology section, and most importantly, expanding his vision for implementation. This last part was what Porter had seemed most interested in, not just the science, but how it would reach the people who needed it. By noon, his eyes were burning from staring at the screen, and his stomach reminded him he'd skipped breakfast. Aiden grabbed his backpack and headed to campus, deciding to work from the library where he could access the scientific journals he needed for his citations. As he crossed the main quad, he noticed students gathering in small groups, their voices excited. A few people glanced his way, then quickly looked away when he made eye contact. Strange. Aiden was halfway to the library when Professor Chen appeared on the path ahead, walking purposefully toward him. There you are, she said, slightly out of breath. I've been trying to reach you. Aiden checked his phone and noticed 3 missed calls from her. Sorry, Professor. I was working on the proposal and must have silenced my phone. She gave him an appraising look. So you're actually doing it? Sending Porter your full research plan? Yes, he asked for it by Friday. Professor Chen nodded, her expression a mix of concern and excitement. You should know that your interaction with Mr. Porter yesterday has become quite the topic of conversation. The dean called an emergency meeting with department heads this morning. Aiden's stomach dropped. Am I in trouble? To his surprise, she laughed. Quite the opposite. Porter called the university president this morning and specifically mentioned your work. Apparently he was very impressed. Relief washed over him. That's good, right? It's unprecedented, she replied. But there's something else you should be aware of. She pulled out her tablet and opened a browser window. This was posted on Porter's social media an hour ago. The post showed a photo of Porter in what looked like a board meeting, but instead of his usual coffee, he was holding what appeared to be a protein bar similar to Aiden's design. The caption read, "Sometimes the most valuable advice comes from unexpected sources. Grateful for a young researcher who stopped me from sampling an experimental protein compound yesterday. Reminded me why we need diverse voices in science. They notice what others miss. Future of food, Duras innovation." Aiden read it twice, his heart racing. The post already had thousands of likes and comments. He didn't use my name, Aiden said finally. No, but people are figuring it out. Porter's visit wasn't exactly secret, and the university press office released photos of the tour. Professor Chen swiped to another image showing Porter in the lab, with Aiden visible in the background at his workstation. I didn't realize, Aiden said quietly. Professor Chen put her hand on his shoulder. This could be a significant opportunity for you, but it also comes with pressure. The department is excited about the potential connection to Porter's foundation, but remember that your research stands on its own merit, regardless of this attention. Aiden nodded, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. Yesterday, he'd been just another student researcher. Today, people were looking at him differently, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. Focus on your proposal, Professor Chen advised. Make it the best work you can do. I've cleared my schedule tomorrow afternoon if you want me to review it before you send it. Thank you, Aiden said sincerely. I'd appreciate that. As Professor Chen walked away, Aiden's phone buzzed with a notification. Then another, and another. His social media accounts were suddenly lighting up with friend requests and messages from people he barely knew. He silenced his phone completely and continued to the library, finding a quiet corner on the third floor where he could work undisturbed. For the next several hours, he lost himself in the familiar comfort of research, refining his proposal and expanding the sections on community implementation. The library was nearly empty when Aiden finally looked up, surprised to find it was almost 8 p.m. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him he'd eaten nothing all day except a granola bar from his backpack. He packed up his things and headed out, deciding to pick up dinner on the way home. As he waited for his takeout order at a small noodle shop near campus, Aiden finally checked his phone. 23 messages, dozens of notifications, and 3 voicemails, 2 from numbers he didn't recognize and 1 from his mother. He listened to his mom's message first. Baby, why am I hearing from Mrs. Thompson next door that my son is all over the internet with some billionaire? Call me back right away. Aiden smiled despite his exhaustion. News traveled fast in his old neighborhood. He called her back as he walked home with his food. Finally, his mother answered. What's going on with you? Mrs. Thompson's granddaughter goes to your university and said everyone's talking about how you saved some rich man from poisoning himself. It's not exactly like that, Mom, Aiden explained, then gave her a simplified version of what happened with Porter and the protein bar. So all this fuss because you stopped someone from eating something they shouldn't? That's just common sense, his mother said, though he could hear the pride in her voice. The important part is he's interested in my research, Aiden explained. He wants me to send him my full proposal by Friday. It could mean funding for the project. Well, that's wonderful, baby, she said. Just don't let all this attention go to your head. And don't let them take advantage of your good ideas either. I won't, Mom. And eat something decent, not just those noodles. Aiden looked down at the takeout bag in his hand and laughed. How did you know? I raised you, didn't I? Now go eat and get some rest. Call me after you send that proposal. By the time Aiden reached his apartment, he felt both exhausted and energized. Leo wasn't home yet, so the place was quiet. He ate his noodles while reviewing what he'd written so far, making notes for sections he still needed to complete. Just as he was about to close his laptop and call it a night, a new email notification appeared. The sender's address made him sit up straight. Richard Porter himself, not an assistant or a generic company account. The message was brief. Heard about the buzz on campus. Didn't mean to complicate your week. The offer stands. I want to see your full vision, not just what fits academic parameters. Don't worry about format or length. Just show me what's possible if resources weren't an issue. R.P. Aiden read the email 3 times, his tired mind trying to process what it meant. Porter was giving him permission to think beyond the usual constraints of academic proposals, to imagine what might be possible with real backing. He opened a new document and began typing, a different kind of energy flowing through him now. This wasn't about impressing a billionaire or gaining attention. This was about the communities like the one he'd grown up in, about making real change in how food reached people who needed it most. Aiden wrote until his eyes wouldn't stay open, outlining a vision that went beyond his original research. A network of regional food innovation centers, open-source formulas adapted to local plants, community-led production that created jobs while addressing nutrition. When he finally fell into bed at 2 a.m., his dreams were filled with growing fields and bustling kitchens, with people gathering around tables filled with food they had helped create. And somewhere in those dreams was the memory of his grandmother telling him, "Some people are born to feed others, child. Not just their bodies, but their hopes too." Friday morning arrived with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. Aiden had barely slept the past 3 nights, pouring everything he had into his proposal. What had started as a 20-page academic document had evolved into a 45-page comprehensive vision that combined rigorous science with practical implementation strategies. He'd worked through Professor Chen's feedback yesterday afternoon, refining the technical sections while expanding on the community integration aspects. Now, sitting in the small campus coffee shop with his roommate Leo, Aiden stared at his laptop screen, his finger hovering over the send button. "Just do it already," Leo urged, pushing a fresh coffee toward him. "You've checked it 10 times. What if it's too ambitious?" Aiden asked, scrolling through the document one more time. "I've basically outlined a global food initiative, not just a research project." Leo, still in his hospital scrubs from his morning shift, leaned forward. "Isn't that exactly what Porter asked for? Your full vision without constraints?" "Yeah, but—" "No buts," Leo interrupted. "Send it before you overthink it even more." Aiden took a deep breath and clicked send. The email disappeared from his screen, making its way to Richard Porter's inbox. It felt surreal knowing a billionaire would soon be reading his ideas. Ideas born from watching his grandmother stretch ingredients to feed unexpected guests, from community gardens squeezed between buildings, from nights when dinner had been whatever was on sale. "There," Aiden said, closing his laptop. "Now we wait." Leo checked his watch. "No time for waiting. We've got exactly 40 minutes to get to the dean's reception." Aiden groaned. "Do I really have to go to that? Professor Chen specifically asked for you to be there. Something about making connections with industry partners." Leo stood up, gathering their empty cups. "Besides, you can't hide in the lab forever. The mysterious protein bar student who caught Porter's attention. People want to meet you." That was exactly what Aiden was afraid of. The past 2 days had been a strange blur of curious stares and unexpected conversations, with students and faculty who'd never noticed him before. He wasn't naive. He understood that much of the sudden interest came from people hoping to connect with Porter through him. It made him uncomfortable, but Professor Chen had insisted this reception was important for the department. For the next 45 minutes, Aiden found himself engaged in the most rigorous but respectful discussion of his work he'd ever experienced. Dr. Winters probed the scientific methodology, asking about control variables and testing protocols. Ms. Rollins challenged his community implementation models, drawing on her experience with similar projects in different regions. Rather than feeling defensive, Aiden found himself energized by their questions. They were taking his ideas seriously enough to examine them from every angle. "Your budget projections for the pilot phase seem quite lean," Mr. Chang observed, referencing specific pages from the proposal. "Have you considered the cost of regulatory approval pathways?" "That's addressed in Appendix C," Aiden replied, grateful for the hours he'd spent researching those exact requirements. I've estimated based on similar novel food applications, but I recognize those costs could vary significantly depending on region. Porter, who had been mostly listening, leaned forward. What impresses me most is that you've created a scalable model. You're not just proposing a single product, but a system that communities can adapt to their specific needs and resources. That's the heart of it, Aiden agreed. Food insecurity isn't just about calories. It's about access, cultural relevance, and local ownership. Dr. Okafor spoke up for the first time. I particularly appreciate your emphasis on indigenous knowledge. Too many Western approaches ignore generations of local agricultural wisdom. Her comment was both praise and a subtle challenge to see how Aiden would respond. Absolutely, he said. My grandmother could look at plants and know things no textbook taught me. Any solution that ignores that kind of knowledge is incomplete from the start. The conversation continued, shifting from technical details to broader vision. As they approached the 1-hour mark, Aiden realized they hadn't just been evaluating his proposal. They had been building on it, offering refinements and expansions that strengthened the core idea. Finally, Porter glanced at his watch. We should wrap up for now, though I feel we could continue this discussion for hours. He looked directly at Aiden through the screen. I'd like to make you a proposal if you're open to it. Aiden sat up straighter. Of course. The Porter Foundation would like to fund the full development of this project, starting with a grant of $1.5 million for the initial 18-month phase. The number hit Aiden like a physical force. He had hoped for perhaps $50,000 to continue his research, enough to prove the concept further. $1.5 million was beyond anything he had imagined. That's substantial, he managed to say. Porter nodded. It matches the scale of what you're proposing. But there's more than just funding involved. We'd like to provide mentorship through our network of experts, access to our testing facilities, and connections to communities where pilot programs could begin. Aiden's mind raced, trying to process what this would mean. Before he could respond, Ms. Bryant, the legal counsel, spoke up. There's an important question of intellectual property here, she said. Your proposal mentioned open-source formulations, which aligns with our humanitarian focus, but we should discuss the specifics of what that means in practice. It was a critical point, one that could easily become a sticking point. Aiden took a breath. My priority is maximizing access and adaptation. I believe the core technology should remain open source, but I'm open to discussing protective measures that prevent commercial exploitation without community benefit. Ms. Bryant nodded, seeming satisfied with his answer. That's a thoughtful approach. We can work with that framework. Porter leaned back in his chair, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. I think we have the beginnings of something important here. My team will draft a formal grant proposal for your review by next week. In the meantime, I'd like you to think about what resources you'll need beyond funding. Lab space, equipment, personnel. Aiden nodded, still somewhat stunned. I will, thank you for this opportunity. No, Porter said with unexpected sincerity. Thank you for stopping me from eating that protein bar. A smile crept across his face. Sometimes the universe works in strange ways. If you hadn't been in that lab that evening, working late when everyone else had gone home, we wouldn't be having this conversation. After a few more minutes of logistics and goodbyes, Aiden ended the call and sat in the silent conference room, trying to process what had just happened. His phone buzzed with a text from Leo. How did it go? Before Aiden could reply, there was a knock at the door. Professor Chen peeked in, her expression hopeful. Well? They're funding it, Aiden said, the reality finally sinking in. Full development. $1.5 million for the first phase. Her eyes widened. Aiden, that's extraordinary. It doesn't feel real yet, he admitted. It's very real, she assured him, sitting down across from him, and very well deserved. This isn't just luck. It's recognition of your vision and hard work. That evening, Aiden sat on the steps of his apartment building, phone in hand, having just finished a long call with his mother. She had cried when he told her the news, then immediately started planning a celebration dinner for when he visited home next month. As the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, he scrolled through his proposal one more time, seeing it now not just as an academic document or even a grant application, but as a blueprint for real change. His phone pinged with an email notification from Porter. Just confirmed our first pilot location will be in Pine Ridge. Seemed fitting to start where the inspiration began. Your background isn't just your story. It's your unique perspective that makes this work matter. RP Aiden smiled, a sense of completion washing over him. The journey ahead would be challenging, with countless details to navigate and obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, the distance between his dreams and reality had shortened considerably. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, he thought about the strange path that had led here. A late night in a lab, a protein bar that wasn't ready for consumption, a split-second decision to shout across a room. Sometimes the biggest opportunities came disguised as small moments. And sometimes being in the right place at the right time wasn't just luck, it was the result of all the hours spent working when no one was watching, driven by a purpose that went beyond personal gain. Aiden took a deep breath of the cool evening air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight he allowed himself to simply appreciate how far he'd come from that crowded lab just a week ago, when he'd yelled, "Don't eat that," and changed the course of his future.